An elderly man sits alone in a square. 85 years later, a detail in his hand changes everything. In the dusty archives of the Museum of the City of New York, Dr. Elena Rodriguez examined historical photographs from the 1930s. It was March 2024, and she had spent weeks cataloging images for an exhibition about the Great Depression. "Another photo of Washington Square Park," she murmured, lifting a black and white image dated February 1939. In the foreground, an elderly man of about 70 wore a dark coat and a felt hat. Deep wrinkles marked his face as he looked toward the camera with an indecipherable expression. His hands were clasped in his lap, and something about that posture caught Elena's attention. She had seen hundreds of photographs from that era, but this man seemed to be waiting for something specific. How strange, she thought, bringing the magnifying glass closer. Most photographs showed families or groups. This man was completely alone. According to the records, the photograph had been donated in 1987 by the Patterson family, former residents of Greenwich Village. There was no information about the man's identity or the circumstances of the image. "Dr. Mitchell," she called to her colleague, "could you come here for a moment?" James Mitchell, a specialist in urban history, approached with curiosity. "What have you found, Elena?" "This photograph. There's something different about it. This man doesn't seem like a simple passerby. Look at his eyes." Mitchell examined the image. "You're right. There's determination there, as if he were posing deliberately." He paused. 1939 was when World War II began. Many European refugees were arriving in New York. "Exactly," Elena nodded. "But why would someone photograph a stranger alone in a park?" "Unless he wasn't a stranger," Mitchell murmured. "I think you should investigate this photo further." That night, Elena couldn't get the image out of her head. One question echoed relentlessly. Who was that man, and why was it important to photograph him on that cold afternoon in 1939? The next day, she arrived early with a high-powered magnifying glass and a specialized LED lamp. She placed the photograph on the light table and began a meticulous examination. The wooden bench, the dry leaves, the bare trees in the background, all authentic for a winter afternoon in 1939. Then she moved the magnifying glass toward the man's hands. "What is that?" she whispered, adjusting the focus. Between his interlaced fingers, partially hidden by the shadow of his coat, was a small rectangular object. It had defined edges, too uniform to be ordinary paper. Its shiny surface reflected light in a peculiar way. Elena scanned the photograph in high resolution and digitally enlarged the section of the hands. The numbers became clear. "That's impossible," she murmured, her hands trembling. The photograph was dated February 1939, yet the object showed a year, 8 years in the future. She checked the back of the photograph. The ink marking February 1939 was consistent with the era, including notes about the weather that day. Elena immediately called Mitchell. "James, I need you to come now. I found something extraordinary." When he arrived, she showed him the enlarged image. He stared at it in silence. "Elena," he finally said, "this defies all logic. Are you sure it isn't later manipulation?" "I've verified everything. The photograph is authentic. The date is correct, and that object shows 1947. Mitchell rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "Do you realize what this means? If that man held something in 1939 marked with 1947, Elena said, then he knew something about the future, or he was part of something much bigger. The photograph was no longer a simple relic of the past. It had become an enigma that challenged their understanding of history. I think we're on the edge of something that could change what we know about New York during those years," Mitchell said slowly. They decided to contact the Patterson family, the original donors of the photograph. After several calls, they located Margaret Patterson Wilson in Queens. 65 years old, she welcomed them into a house filled with antiques. My grandparents lived in the village for 40 years, she said. They collected neighborhood photographs as a hobby. Alina showed her the image. Margaret studied it carefully. I don't recognize him, but my grandparents often bought photos from street photographers or estate sales. Did they ever mention European refugees or unusual activity in the neighborhood? Mitchell asked. Actually, yes, Margaret replied. My grandmother told stories about mysterious men in the park. Always alone, always watching. She disappeared into the attic and returned with a dusty box. These are my grandmother's diaries from 1938 to 1942. Alina opened the first notebook and turned to February 1939. There's something here, she murmured. Listen. February 15, 1939. Today, I saw the man in the black coat again. He was on his usual bench, but this time he held something in his hands. At exactly 3:17, a young woman approached, sat briefly, and left. The exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. Mitchell and Alina looked at each other. It was a meeting point, Alina whispered. They continued reading. The diary contained several references to the man in the black coat, all following the same pattern. Brief encounters, quick exchanges, cautious behavior. The most revealing entry was dated March 1, 1939. The man in the black coat no longer comes. Yesterday, I saw 2 men in dark suits asking about him at the bakery. They showed a photograph. It was him, no doubt. Alina closed the diary slowly. This man had been part of something bigger, and someone had been looking for him. And now, so are we, Mitchell added. Margaret watched them, fascinated. Do you really think that after 85 years this still matters? Alina held the photograph. Something tells me this secret has been waiting to be discovered. After meeting with Margaret, Alina and Mitchell returned to the museum with a new perspective. Alina digitized the diary pages, marking specific dates and behavioral patterns. We need to search FBI archives, Mitchell said. If there was espionage, there will be records. Alina contacted Dr. Robert Chen, a specialist in declassified World War II documents at the National Archives. An elderly man in Washington Square in 1939, Chen repeated over the phone. That area was a known meeting point for European refugees. Many were involved in anti-Nazi resistance networks. 3 days later, Chen called back with extraordinary news. I found something fascinating. There's a file on Operation Sanctuary, a network of Jewish refugees and anti-fascists operating out of New York between 1938 and 1941. Alina felt her pulse quicken. Are there descriptions of the participants? One of the main operatives was identified as the observer, Chen said. Male, approximately 70 years old, operating from Washington Square Park. Mitchell leaned closer to the phone. Is there a physical description? Yes, Caucasian male, 1.70 meters tall. Gray hair, always wore a dark coat and a felt hat. He communicated through coded objects. Alina nearly dropped the phone. It's him. What kind of coded objects? He used falsified identification cards with future dates as a coding method. The dates corresponded to operational plans scheduled for those years. Silence filled the room. Alina stared at the enlarged photograph, where 1947 was clearly visible. Is there a reference to what 1947 meant? She asked. That's the most intriguing part, Chen replied. 1947 was the target year for an operation called Phoenix. The plan was to establish a documentation center to preserve evidence of Nazi war crimes. Mitchell sat down slowly. Alina, do you realize this man didn't just know about 1947, he was planning for it? There's more, Chen added. The observer disappeared in March 1939. They never found him. After the call ended, they sat in silence, absorbing the magnitude of the discovery. They had uncovered a forgotten figure whose actions helped shape international justice. The revelation about Operation Sanctuary transformed the investigation. Alina expanded her search to Ellis Island immigration archives, looking for European refugees matching the description. After hours of filtering records from 1936 to 1938, she found something promising. Look at this. Abraham Kowalski, Polish, 68 years old, upon arrival in September 1937. Height 1.70 meters. Gray hair, occupation, history professor. The details match, Mitchell said. Is there a New York address? 154 Sullivan Street, Greenwich Village, 3 blocks from Washington Square Park. Sullivan Street had changed, but Building 154 was still standing. Yeppe Torino, the current manager, had worked in the area for 40 years. Kowalski, Yeppe repeated. That name sounds familiar. My father was the doorman here before me. He led them to the basement, filled with boxes of old records. Papa never threw anything away. He said someday someone would come looking for history. Among yellowed bills, they found the entry. Abraham Kowalski had rented apartment 3B from October 1937 until March 1939. March 1939, Alina said softly. That's when he disappeared. Looked at them with renewed curiosity. My father told a strange story about that apartment. After Kowalski vanished, the police came several times, but they never found anything. Papa saved some belongings before they arrived. Alina's heart raced. Where are those belongings? In the same place Papa hid them in 1939, Yeppe said, leading them to a small room hidden behind the boiler. There, wrapped in waxed canvas, was a small but heavy trunk. When they opened it, Alina held her breath. Inside were photographs, documents in several languages, and a collection of falsified identification cards bearing future date. 1948. Mitchell Alina whispered. He wasn't just an operative. He was coordinating the entire operation. At the bottom of the trunk lay a letter. If someone finds this, know that Abraham Kowalski died fighting injustice. The dates represent the future he helped create. Alina lifted a photograph from the trunk. It showed the same elderly man surrounded by young people, all of them smiling with quiet determination. He didn't die alone, she murmured. He was part of a family of fighters. Kowalski's belongings revealed a far more complex network than they had imagined. Among the documents were addresses, code names, and a diagram outlining the organizational structure of Operation Sanctuary. Alina spread the papers across the table. Look at this, Mitchell. It was a sophisticated operation, with cells in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. The diagram placed the observer at the center, lines extending to 12 operatives. Each carried a bird-related code name: the hawk, the dove, the raven. These addresses are strategically placed near entry points ports. Stations, airports. Micho noted. Alina studied the dates on the cards. Each corresponded to a phase. 1943, establishment of centers. 1945, evidence collection. 1947, testimony and trials. Among the documents were letters written in Polish, German, and Yiddish. Alina contacted Professor Ruth Goldstein of Columbia to translate them. These aren't family letters, the professor said quietly. They're intelligence reports. This one is from January 1939. The packages have arrived from Warsaw. They confirm our worst fears. We must accelerate, Phoenix. What does packages from Warsaw mean? Alina asked. First-hand information from Poland, Goldstein replied. This letter predates the official invasion by 8 months. They already knew what was coming. Mitchell picked up another letter in German. Goldstein translated, Hinrich confirms the documents have been microfilmed. The copies are safe in 3 locations. The truth will find its way. The final letter, written in Yiddish, was the most personal. If you are reading this, our enemies have found me. Do not cry. My real life ended when I saw my library burn in Krakow. Here, I found new purpose. The names are preserved. May memory be a blessing. It was dated March 15, 1939, 3 days after the last diary entry about his disappearance. He knew they were coming for him, Alina whispered. And he made sure the work would continue. Professor Goldstein carefully closed the letters. What you have here is testimony to one of the most heroic acts of resistance in the pre-war era. Abraham Kowalski saved lives and preserved history. Alina looked again at the original photograph. He was no longer just a man sitting in a square. He was a guardian of memory, yet one crucial piece was still missing. What had happened in March 1939? Alina returned to Margaret Patterson's diary, searching for entries from that month. There's something here, she murmured. March 10th, I saw the red-haired girl again. She looked nervous, always glancing over her shoulder. She sat on the bench for an hour, but he never appeared. The red-haired girl? Mitchell asked. Alina flipped back a few pages. February 20th, the red-haired girl came again. The exchange was longer. They worked together, I'm sure. She continued to the most revealing. Entry. March 12, 1939. I finally spoke with the red-haired girl. Her name is Sarah. She speaks with a European accent. She was crying. She told me her grandfather had disappeared. She gave me this to keep, in case something happened to her too. Attached to the diary was a small envelope, still sealed. Alina opened it carefully. Inside were a photograph and a note. The photograph showed 8 people standing in a library. Abraham Kowalski stood at the center, surrounded by younger faces. In one corner, they recognized the red hair. The note read, "If something happens to Abraham and me, I want the world to know we were not ordinary spies. We were librarians, professors, students. Abraham was a professor at the University of Krakow. I was his research assistant. When the Nazis burned our library, we swore never again to allow history to be erased. The names are on the back. If we survive, we will meet at the New York Public Library on the first day of spring, 1947, Sarah Rosenberg." March 11, 1939. Alina turned the photograph over. 8 names were listed beside cities: Warsaw, Prague, Vienna, Berlin. Budapest, an international network of refugee academics. Mitchell said softly. And Sarah planned to reunite with the survivors in 1947, Alina added. The same year on Kowalski's card, Alina felt a surge of renewed determination. We have to find Sarah Rosenberg. That afternoon, they contacted the genealogical department of the Historical Society. Using the notes, they traced Sarah Rosenberg. She had arrived in 1937 from Krakow and worked as a librarian until 1943, when she donated a collection known as the Phoenix Archive. The Phoenix Archive, Alina said softly. The operation continued without Kowalski. The next day, they went to the New York Public Library. The Phoenix Archive occupied an entire section of the research basement. Dorothy Chen, the head librarian, greeted them with curiosity. The Phoenix Archive is one of our most frequently consulted collections by Holocaust researchers, she explained. It was donated by Sarah Rosenberg in 1943. Is there any record of what happened to her afterward? Alina asked. Dorothy smiled faintly. Why don't you ask her yourself? Alina and Mitchell stared at her. Is she alive? Sarah Rosenberg Goldberg is 107, Dorothy replied. She still comes once a month. In fact, she'll be here tomorrow. It's exactly 10 o'clock the next morning. A small woman in a wheelchair arrived. Sarah had snow-white hair and piercing green eyes. When she saw Alina and Mitchell waiting, she stopped. Who are these people? She asked, her voice marked by a slight European accent. Alina stepped forward, holding Abraham Kowalski's photograph. Mrs. Goldberg, we believe you knew this man. Sarah took the photograph with trembling hands. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then tears streamed down her cheeks. "Abraham," she whispered. "My dear Abraham. Where did you find this?" "We've been investigating his story," Alina said. "We found his belongings, his letters, and your note in Mrs. Patterson's diary." Sarah looked at her with new intensity. "After all these years?" Mitchell leaned closer. "What happened to Abraham in March 1939? Sarah closed her eyes, gathering herself. "We were betrayed. There was an infiltrator in our networks, someone who pretended to be a refugee but worked for the Gestapo." "The Gestapo operated in New York?" Alina asked. "Oh yes," Sarah replied bitterly. "They had cells dedicated to eliminating Jewish resistance networks. On March 11th, Abraham received a warning that we had been compromised." She paused to drink some water. "That was the last time I saw him. The next day, they found his body in the Hudson River." Alina felt a chill. "They ruled it a suicide. But we knew the truth," Sarah said. "Abraham would never have given up. They murdered him." "And what did you do?" Mitchell asked quietly. "What Abraham taught me to do: protect the work," she replied. "I took the documents, changed my name, moved constantly, and kept collecting testimonies." She smiled with fierce pride. "Do you see that collection? Those documents helped convict war criminals. Abraham died, but his vision was fully realized." For 3 hours, Sarah Rosenberg Goldberg shared a story that transformed Alina and Mitchell's understanding of Abraham Kowalski and Operation Sanctuary. "Abraham wasn't just a professor," Sarah said. "In Krakow, he directed the most important Jewish historical archives in Poland. When the Nazis began burning libraries, he had already microfilmed thousands of documents." Lena took notes rapidly. "Did he bring those documents to the United States?" "He sent copies through multiple routes: America, England, Palestine. He knew the evidence couldn't be kept in one place." Sarah led them through the Phoenix archive, gesturing to the shelves. "All of this began with Abraham's vision. The network was much larger than you imagine." Mitchell studied the collection. "Did all the code names correspond to real people?" "Yes, and they all shared the same mission: preserve evidence so that when justice came, the world could not deny what had happened." Sarah pointed to a separate section. "After they killed Abraham, I became the coordinator. I was 24 and terrified, but he had trained me well." "How did you keep the network functioning?" Alina asked. "I changed the structure. Instead of meetings, we used dead drops across the city: the Chen Laundry in Chinatown, the Goldstein bookstore, even the lost books department of this library." Lena looked around in disbelief. The library was part of the operation, the safest place to hide secrets. "Is a public library," Sarah said. She guided them to a display case holding a familiar card marked 1947. This was Abraham's original card from the photograph. "I recovered it after his death." "The numbers?" Mitchell asked. "Did they have a specific meaning?" 1947 wasn't just a target year," Sarah explained. "The other numbers were coordinates for locations where we hid critical documents." She pointed to photographs from the Nuremberg trials. "Do you see that woman handing documents to the prosecutor?" Alina looked closely. It was a young, red-haired woman. "That's me," Sarah said. "In 1947, I was 30 years old, finally fulfilling the promise I made to Abraham 8 years earlier." "And after the trials?" Alina asked. "I continued," Sarah replied. "I married, had children, but I never stopped collecting testimonies. Every survivor, every family, their voices are all here." Alina stood in silence, gazing at the vast archive. "It's a living monument." "It's Abraham Kowalski's legacy," Sarah corrected. "And now you are the guardians of his story." 6 months later, Alina and Mitchell transformed their discovery into an exhibition titled Guardians of Memory: The Secret History of Operation Sanctuary at the Museum of the City of New York. The exhibition opened with Abraham Kowalski's original photograph, framed as the centerpiece. A magnifying glass allowed visitors to study the detail that begun everything. The card marked 1947 in his hands. Alina watched a Jewish family read the panels through tears. The grandmother approached her. "Is it true this man saved so many documents?" she asked, her voice marked by a European accent. "It's true," Alina replied. "Abraham Kowalski and his network preserved thousands of testimonies." "My family was from Krakow," the woman said softly. "Maybe he knew my grandfather." Alina guided her to the interactive archive, where visitors could search names from the Phoenix collection. The screen displayed Mari Goldstein Krakow, testimony preserved by AK 1938. The woman gasped. "It's him. It's my grandfather. I thought nothing remained." Moments like this repeated every day. Mitchell joined Alina, smiling. Young visitors are creating their own Phoenix archives, recording family stories. Alina watched a young Latina woman speaking into a camera. "My great-grandmother escaped from El Salvador. She could never tell her story because it was too painful. But after seeing this, I understand that her silence was also resistance." That afternoon, they visited Sarah at her residence. "How does it feel to see Abraham's story finally told?" Alina asked. Sarah, now 108 years old, smiled. "I feel like I can rest. For 85 years, I was the only guardian of his memory. Now there are thousands." Mitchell gestured toward a stack of letters on the table. "They're coming from all over the world. Families finding connections, students learning about resistance, museums wanting to create similar exhibitions." "Your work with Abraham didn't end in 1947, Alina said. "It keeps growing." Sarah nodded. "That was his true vision. Not just to preserve the past, but to inspire the future. He wanted people to understand that resistance is sometimes simply refusing to let truth be forgotten." As the sun set, Alina reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a single photograph. "Do you know what's most beautiful about all this?" Sarah asked. "What?" Alina and Mitchell said together. Sarah smiled with a century of wisdom. "Abraham thought he had failed when they killed him. But 85 years later, we discover he had barely begun. His photograph was waiting to tell the whole story." Alina looked toward Washington Square Park in the distance. Some legacies simply need time to flourish. And Abraham Kowalski's story would continue to inspire future generations, just as he had planned on that cold afternoon in 1939.